Good morning and welcome to a slightly bleary-eyed Hibs Observer morning briefing after last night's late night escapades at Easter Road. A pretty heartbreaking outcome for Hibs against Midtjylland, taking the Danish side all the way to extra time. Game looked as though it was destined for a penalty shootout, only for it's probably one of the most heartbreaking ways to lose a game of football. A pretty outrageous goal from Midtjylland's junior Bramado, settling a tie that had pretty much everything over the two legs. Hibs doing themselves, kind of no harm at all in terms of their reputation, how they applied themselves, how they performed over the two legs, but unfortunately just not enough to get it done in the end. Joined this morning by Craig Nisbet, welcoming him back after a brief hiatus after last season. Craig, good to have you on again. How are you getting on? You well?
I'm very well, mate. I'm very well. Yeah, no, absolutely. A late night and mixed feelings because obviously it's a heartbreaking way to lose the game. But there was obviously a huge amount of pride for the players, just in terms of how they performed and battled over the course of the two legs. So yeah, sort of like mixed emotions last night.
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that 100%. So before we get stuck into the game properly, folks, just as always, a quick word from our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. So you kind of hinted at it there, Craig. Obviously it'll be a bit raw at the moment, I imagine. But as the overwhelming, once that kind of settles, will the sort of overwhelming emotion be, kind of pride at how Hibs approached that tie?
Yeah, definitely. I think when the draw came out, it was probably one of the hardest draws we could have got. Especially typical Hibs finishing third and then not getting the easy route, then getting probably one of the toughest draws. So they're obviously a really good side in terms of European experience. I was looking this morning, in the last sort of 5 seasons or so, they've had over 40 odd games in Europe, where we've had 14. So, I know they have different groups of players and they're a selling club and players come and go, but, they've obviously got that experience. So it was always going to be really difficult. And I sort of was really pleasantly surprised in the first leg, just in how we performed. And last night going to the game, I was pretty nervous. I sort of thought they would really come out of the traps and really try and, cut us down early, try and get a few goals. But again, we were shown like a lot of resilience and a lot of grit. And, we just sort of picked up from where we were last season, which I think was really good to see. And obviously we've embedded a couple of new players, and I thought they looked really good as well. And it was like overall a really positive performance. It's just, when it got to extra time, you could see that they were able to bring on subs that were really going to impact the game. And although we made subs as well, it just didn't quite have the same impact as they had as well. And eventually that just seen us out at the last knock-ins of the match. But certainly, I think really, really good effort from the players, and they should be really proud of how we performed over the two legs.
Yeah, I think so. I think once obviously the disappointment wears off for the players, I think they'll probably feel that as well. David Gray certainly hinted at it last night. Obviously, he's saying that you don't want to lose games at any point. It doesn't matter who you're playing against, and it was a sore one. Just like, what was your impressions of how Hibs approached the second leg last night? Because they were always going to have to be maybe a wee bit more expansive than in the first leg. But I think it's, I think for me, I sort of said this after the first leg, and I could say it again last night, and I do mean it as a compliment. I don't think we actually, learned anything particularly new about Hibs and this team from these games, because I feel like they've sort of shown qualities and the type of discipline and sort of tactical awareness, the sort of well coached nature of the side. We've seen that plenty of times. I think this was just progressing it to a sort of natural next step in Europe, and it's you kind of seen a lot of the qualities that we saw last season. And I think they stepped up well. Obviously, the result is what it is, but as you say, this is a side with a lot of European experience, and I just feel like that. I think experience counts for an awful lot in Europe. It's one of those kind of intangible things of just having the know-how, just having the wherewithal and how these ties work and how to get through them. So, I mean, what was your overall impression of how Hibs approached it? The setup, the way they, the way they tried to stop Midtjylland, how they tried to attack. What was your overall take?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think there was anything massively new that we've learned. Obviously, there's a bit of bedding in for McGrath and Mulligan. Mulligan's a different fit to Triantis, and obviously McGrath coming in as well. It changes the midfield dynamic. So I think that's the only bit that sort of changed a little bit in terms of how we set up and how we play, and it's different for Levitt having Mulligan in there compared to Triantis. But yeah, I mean, they obviously, they get their fullbacks high and wide. They're kind of like a 4-4-2, and then they have their two holding midfielders, and then they have quite a fluid front four, don't they, where their wingers kind of coming inside, strikers moving all across, dropping deep, and they obviously they're pretty direct, but they were obviously pretty comfortable in possession as well. You can see that just the way they move the ball around, and I think you're right on that European know-how. I never ever felt they looked rattled or they looked tired. They just looked like they were like, well, we're just going to keep going and eventually we'll get the goal. And I think that was probably the difference between the sides, whereas, after a certain point we were just stumping the ball clear and probably trying to push towards penalties, whereas they were still pushing to win the game. And I think that's the kind of subtle difference probably between the two sides. But no, I thought, they, in terms of them against us, they pressed high, but they weren't like super aggressive. Like, they let us pop the ball out from the back. I think once the ball went into the wide areas, they obviously pressed a little bit more, but they seemed quite comfortable. I think we relied on going in behind quite a lot and trying to get Boyle in and Bowie in, and that never quite paid off as much. And I think they were quite comfortable going, right, put it into the channels, centre halves, we'll deal with that. And I did sort of think we missed somebody playing through the lines a little bit more. And when we did get McGrath on the ball centrally, or Mulligan stepped out with the ball, that's when I thought we looked our most dangerous. But just that stage in pre-season or the season just starting, anytime there was that like final ball, that sort of last pass just before, when you're on a counter-attack and you're in a 3v2, we just seem to make the wrong decision or take one too many touches. And, hopefully in time that'll sharpen up. But yeah, I think you could see that. I think Bowie's going to be so important for us, just the way he holds the ball up and the way he can sort of alleviate the pressure and bring others into the game. And I suppose that's one thing over the two legs I've walked away from going, I think when and I think I said this on Twitter last night, when he comes off, I don't really think we've got a replacement to sort of keep doing that, and that then changes the way we're playing, and I think that's quite noticeable. And I know he stayed on for a little bit longer than he did in the first leg, and I did think Josh Campbell, when he came on, in terms of that aerial threat, Josh Campbell can give that, and he was quite a key part of the equaliser because he won the first ball, and he becomes the sort of target player. But I do think that's where we're maybe lacking in that part of the pitch. Maybe another striker with that sort of physicality that can come on and perform that role, because it can become a little bit, we get the ball wide, we're under pressure, we have to play it in the channel, and we're just turning the ball over a lot. So I do think it's probably down the spine of that team. Maybe another holding midfielder. I know we're probably not going to get Triantis now. I do think it's hard for Levitt in there on his own, and Mulligan's like a sort of different type of player. He likes to drive forward with the ball. So I think that and a striker seems to be the sort of missing links, I would say. But overall, I thought Obita's come back into the side in these last two games. I thought he was outstanding. I think defensively and even offensively as well. I thought he was brilliant, and the way McGrath settled in as well. Again, I think he's got really good touches, moves the ball quick. I think he looks like he's a fantastic addition as well. So, I certainly think like all the parts are there. There's a couple maybe missing, but I'm quite happy that we kind of look like the same team from last season, because that's what got us the success. So you're hoping to just add to that And obviously we've made a couple of signings, but I do think there's room for a couple more.
Yeah, it become a stage, a case, of just kind of evolving the team rather than, having to, pick it apart and, build from the ground up, which was kind of the sort of situation had to an extent found themselves in last summer. And I think there was because of the position they were in last summer, there was almost an expectation that this summer was going to be, where the rebuild was really going to take place. But because of how things ended up panning out last season, it's more about trying to tweak and refine elements of it, which is obviously a good place to be in. But I think I agree that there's probably a need for another midfield option in there. Triantis, obviously going to be a difficult player to replace because he's just the sheer kind of volume of attributes that he brought, to be honest. It's going to be a difficult one. As you say, another option up front. I completely agree about how when Bowie comes off, it changes the dynamic of how Hibs can play. Obviously, Thibaut Clige has come in, but we've not seen much of him yet. But you only need to look at the stats from him. He's not the same type of player as Kieran Bowie. He's a pacey player. No. He's tricky. Obviously, you want options to be able to switch things up. But as you say, it is quite a significant shift in how you have to play when you have somebody he's such a kind of unique type of player, Kieran Bowie. He's a bit of a throwback, really, isn't he? In terms of
he is, and I think he's willing to run. He's willing to run the channels. He's willing to go in. He pins centre halves, and he's rough, and he forces them into mistakes. They certainly don't want to take touches around them, so it leads to them maybe clearing it and the ball getting turned over. And I think he's just going to be such a crucial part of how we play. And yeah, it's funny, because I think him and Triantis, or that sort of Triantis role, are quite linked, because when he goes off and you put Clige on and you put Hoylett on, then you can't go long really at that point because you've got no height. So if Campbell comes on there, then you maybe play Campbell a bit further forward, and then right, we can get runners off him. But obviously the way the subs went, Campbell then had to drop back into sort of centre midfield beside McGrath, which you can't have Campbell then marauding forward, because then it leaves us really, really sort of a bit free in the middle for Midtjylland to press. So I think the subs were obviously Gray's in a really tough position, because he's obviously got this game to think about and try and win, but he then has Dundee on Sunday to think about, and the player load and where the players are at and the sort of team he wants to put out against Dundee. So I felt like he was probably forced into a couple of those substitutions for the greater good, which then changed the dynamics of how we had to play. And obviously, people were switched around. Mulligan went to right wing back, and McGrath's went to centre mid, and Campbell's come on and played further forward, then went into centre mid. So it was sort of chopping and changing as the game wore on. And that's not a criticism of Gray and what he did, because I think the subs and tactically, I think he got it pretty much spot on. But yeah, you could certainly see that we were under a lot of pressure from Midtjylland, and then we really struggled to get out against them. We had the odd counter attack here and there, and with Clige and Hoylett, and Hoylett had a massive chance, just before they went up and scored. Where
that was so incredibly unlike him as well.
I know it was a perfect player. You want just somebody so calm, quick feet in that position, but he proper snatched at it, didn't he? And he just and so I think that. And I think for Gray, that'll maybe be another thing of saying, this is where we're not quite the finished article there. There's just to say there's maybe just those two positions, and then I think we've got sort of incredible depth at that point if they're filled, off the bench, because everything else is looking good. And even players last season, like I even thought O'Hora was solid. He looked really solid, fit. Looked great. He played a fantastic long ball through for Bowie, I think, at one point as well. And and Iredale and these guys, everyone's come back looking fit, looking sharp, and picking up where they've left off. And I don't think we're far away from having a really, really good squad going into the season. But I do think those two areas stand out.
Yeah, and I think it certainly stands out that wee bit more when you're playing at this level as well. It's almost, I don't think it's almost, it is a bit of a cliche to say that, that the margins are that bit finer when you're playing against these, that you're playing on the European stage, you're playing against this quality of team. But even then, I mean, the quality of the two Midtjylland goals, it's kind of like, what are you?
Yeah.
I think maybe the first one, the manager will maybe always look at, could somebody have closed it down? But I mean, even then, to find the corner the way he has for the first goal, and then the second goal is just outrageous, isn't it? So it's one of those ones where you kind of up and you're like, well, what can you do about that?
I know, and even the first leg, the free kick was a stunning free kick. It was up and over the wall at such pace. But yeah, I watched the goals back this morning before we did this just to see. But sorry, I said to you before we recorded that I'd wrote a note early on because Osorio had cut in a couple of times in the first half, and hit a few and looked dangerous coming off the left hand side. And then he sort of dipped out the game for quite a long period of. I actually thought he had went off because I never really seen him pop up anymore. But when you look at the goal, he cuts in, and actually McGrath and Campbell are quite close together, and he's really far out. he's ridiculously far out, and he just shifts the ball sort of half a yard. And again, it's more so just the pace of the strike. It's not a floating shot or a curler. He absolutely zings it, and you can see Smith's feet scrambling across, but it's in the back of the net. And yeah, even the second one, I actually think the second one will be probably the one that they're more disappointed about, because we get the ball clear, we're moving up the pitch, we're obviously trying to squeeze up, and it's like a long ball forward, and we're just a tiny wee bit disorganised. Megwa wins the header, he's sort of a wee bit outnumbered on that side, and obviously, for a guy like Rocky and the back three, they'll not want to concede goals like that. But again, the ball's curled in, and it's just a unbelievable strike, and again, good contact on the ball, good pace, and just another ridiculous goal. But that just shows, that's what we pushed that team, that the goals they got against us were brilliant goals, and that was due to us and how we pushed them and how we played against them. And on another night, we had the ball in the back of the net a couple of times and had some big counter attacks, and if things had gone our way or Martin Boyle could stay on side, we might have the game might have gone differently. But it's those are the margins in Europe. If you want to play against these teams, everything has to be just right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not much consolation for Hibs, and it doesn't really matter because Midtjylland at the end of the day did win the tie, but they'll be hard pushed, I think, even if they get to the Europa League, to have a tougher shift over two legs than Hibs put them through there. So, I mean, it's on to Belgrade next week. Another crack at it for David Gray and his players. But just the kind of outstanding point from last night. The story broke before the game that there was interest in Grant Hanley. And then lo and behold, Grant Hanley was at Easter Road taking in the game. David Gray, in sort of typical fashion, wasn't given really anything away about what might be happening there. Typically unflappable from the Hibs head coach, but it's our understanding that there is interest in Grant Hanley, and that's obviously backed up by the fact that he was in attendance last night, and it sort of ties into the fact that Blackburn Rovers are working on a deal to sign Lewis Miller. There was reports last night that it's a done deal. We're not sure it's quite that far along the line yet. Hibs will be looking for the total package in excess of $1 million for Miller. But if Miller is indeed about to depart, then to have somebody like Hanley coming in, really experienced, coming up for 34, over 60 caps for Scotland, a lot of years playing in England, free agent as well. Do you think does that one to file straight under sensible?
Yeah, I think so. I think if Miller's going to go, and we're kind of fairly covered on that right hand side with Hora and Ekpiteta, but I would imagine Ekpiteta's not had much of a look in since he came back from injury. He was unlucky because he was actually doing quite well before he got injured, and I would imagine that he would maybe want to play a little bit more. So I think it makes a lot of sense. If he's a free agent, he's got lots of experience. I think him coming in and playing maybe that right side of the back three would work. I could also see him playing centre. If anything, if Rocky was to pick up a knock or injured, I could see Hanley slotting in there and using his leadership and experience to marshal that. So yeah, I do think it's a sensible one. And if Lewis Miller goes, if we can get $1 million for him over, however that deal looks, I think that's a good bit of business, because he's far from the finished article, and he did have a really strong end to the season last season, and he did perform well. But I think if we can get that kind of money for him now before his deal runs out, it's next season, isn't it? The end of next season, the deal runs out. Then I'd rather cash in on him now, because I think we can cover that position. So yeah, I mean, as we were discussing throughout, like I don't think it's an area of the pitch that we really need to strengthen. At the moment, I think there's other areas that are more important, but I think if you've got someone like Hanley around, I think it's a sensible signing.
Yeah, it's another really experienced operator that came in. And I think with Miller as well, you're right there. It's like a year left on his deal, and that year is only because Hibs triggered the extension option in his last deal that ran out at the end of last season. So I mean, it looked unlikely that he was going to extend any further beyond that. So it's kind of, if there's interest there, it's the kind of business Hibs probably need to be doing. They've brought him in, and then it looks as though the way things are heading, that they could be selling him on for a profit, which is sort of how Hibs have to operate. As you said, Miller, he's got a lot of development still in him. I think he'll be, certainly since he moved into that right centre back role, it could really potentially be a miss, just in terms of, because he brought a kind of sort of hybrid set of attributes to that role. You could see, that he was ostensibly a fullback, in terms of how he was kind of comfortable stepping forward, stepping into the higher areas of the ball, and in terms of his, the defensive side of it, again, a lot of pace there, helps Hibs play as aggressively as they did last season. He was kind of comfortable sometimes where centre halves aren't, and going out and defending wide areas. So it's, it is one where I think he'll be a miss, but I think it's probably the right time for Hibs to make sure that they that they get they get a fee for him, is what I'm saying.
And also, I think as well, even as a right wing back, I think like Chris Cadden, I thought, I mean, understandably, because it was a good opposition, I thought he struggled a fair bit last night, and I do think that's, again, Miller in that option as a right wing back. Again, he does give you real pace and power, and also if you're, you need, if Smith has to clip the ball into the channels, he's brilliant in the air. He can pop up with a goal here and there. So yeah, he will be a loss, and because he can play over those two positions, it's quite a unique. He's quite a unique player, but I think we're right. We're at that stage where actually it's more important there for us to make a bit of money off that, and then start investing in elsewhere. Now that we brought in Mulligan, who obviously had a bit of played right wing back last night, and you can imagine if he started in that position in the game, that he would be able to probably have quite a good impact. I think having done a shift in centre midfield and then being put out to right wing back was quite tough.
Wing back is the classic graveyard shift, so it's probably not a position that, no matter how fit you are, it's probably not a position that any player wants to be moved out to at that stage of the game, is it?
Yeah, and you could see, I could imagine him, if you've got somebody else in the middle of the park, and if the ball then goes out to, you've obviously got this like attacking midfielder almost running forward with the ball, so you would hope that the quality of the cross and maybe the shot or whatever you get in the end product's going to be better. So yeah, I think there's that cover there, and obviously if you bring Hanley in, he's got good, still for his age, he's got good recovery pace and solid in the air, so you sort of get that part as well. So yeah, I think that those deals sort of make a lot of sense to let Miller go.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed with you on that one. I think we're going to leave it there for this morning. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll have any updates on Grant Hanley and Lewis Miller as they come in. We'll also have more reaction to last night's game, if you can stomach it. And it's, as we said earlier on, all is not lost. Hibs dropping into Conference League qualifying. It means they'll be off to Belgrade next week. But before that, obviously, there's the small matter of the return of Premiership football against Dundee on Sunday, an away trip up to Dens Park. A quick turnaround for David Gray, and his players will have to shrug off the disappointment of last night pretty quickly to go and deal with that challenge. But yeah, we'll be providing all our usual coverage of the game on Sunday, so do keep an eye out for that. Thanks for joining us again. As I said, thanks to Craig for joining us. Thanks for a comeback, if you like, for Craig after a wee hiatus, and then we're heading into the new season. Hopefully we'll see much more of him in the weeks to come. Yeah, we're going to leave it there, folks. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and we'll speak to you again soon. Cheers.